Last night, a single whisper turned my ordinary evening into a doorway I didn't know I'd been waiting to open. I thought I was settling in for another quiet hour with my knitting and the old clock ticking on the wall. But when my grandson leaned close and breathed 4 trembling words into my ear, 20 years of silence shifted. "Stay with me." What he said led us to an old secret, a midnight waltz, and a promise that might heal more than just one aching heart. Before I begin, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love seeing where everyone is tuning in, small towns and big skylines, from the coast to the cornfields. Now, let me take you into my living room, into my night, into the moment that changed everything. My name is Beverly. I'm 69, and my house has that gentle, lived-in quiet that comes from decades of the same footsteps and the same sun slanting across the same floorboards. The hydrangeas outside sag after dusk, heavy with late blooms. The front gate complains in the wind like an old friend who's tired of saying goodbye. Inside, the lamp by the window warms the room the way butter melts, slow, golden, and my husband's records rest in their sleeves, shoulders pressed like a line of faithful soldiers awaiting orders no one has given in years. My grandson's name is Albert. He's 24, named after his grandfather, my Albert, and he carries that name with a care that humbles me. He's taller than the doorframe now, all limbs and earnestness, but he still moves with the cautious grace he had as a child, the way you do when you don't want to break something precious. He'd come to stay the week while his apartment got fumigated, an inconvenience for him, a blessing for me. The first night he arrived, he set his sneakers carefully by the mat and said, "Thanks for the room, Grandma." He smelled like cold air in bus stations. I wanted to hold him until the scent changed to cinnamon and home. We'd had a simple dinner, chicken soup, and a stack of buttered toast, and watched the news without listening. When the anchors signed off and the commercials pitched pills for problems I didn't admit to, I told him to take the spare bedroom, the one with the old quilt my sister made. I stayed in the living room to put my yarn away and tidy the coffee table. It's a habit I have, write the small things when the bigger ones can't be lifted yet. The house settled. You know the symphony. Radiators knocking, a pipe clearing its throat, the neighbor's dog testing out a new bark and abandoning it halfway. I was halfway up from the sofa when I heard it, a soft knock on the doorframe, and the quietest, "Grandma?" "Come in, sweetheart," I said, and I smoothed my sweater as if the night were a guest. Albert stepped into the lamp's circle of light and stood there, not quite looking at me. His hands were in his pockets, and his shoulders made that line men get when there's something stuck between their ribs that words have to pry loose. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the armchair, knees turned toward me, like a boy at attention and a man bracing for weather all at once. "Can I sit here for a bit?" he asked. "You already are." I smiled, but yes. He exhaled and glanced toward the shelf where the records are, where they've always been. He looked back at me and leaned in, not to be mysterious, but because he didn't want to disturb the very air with what he was about to say. When he spoke, I felt his breath warm my cheek, and those 4 little words slid into me like a key finding its lock. I found his letter. The room tightened around the syllables, then seemed to let out a long, thin thread of breath. The clock ticked once, and the space between that tick and the next felt like a long hallway I had to walk down. "Whose letter?" I asked, though I knew. "Grandpa Albert's," he whispered, softer this time, as if he were standing in church. I wasn't looking for it. I swear. I was fixing the wobbly drawer in the sideboard and it was taped to the bottom. My mouth forgot its job for a moment. My hands found each other in my lap, like old casual friends becoming prayerful by accident. Years ago, no, decades. There was a night when my Albert, tired to the bone from the plant and the long drive back through snow, had come in and set his lunchbox down and kissed my cheek with a faraway softness. He told me he was fine. Men from his time were raised to hold in storms, to be their houses. The next morning the phone rang before dawn, and the world I knew shifted 3 inches to the left and never returned. I had never looked for a letter. I didn't think there was one to be found. "Where is it now?" I asked. "In my pocket." He touched the outline in his jeans. I didn't want to open it without you." My name fit in my own mouth again. "Good," I said. "I don't want you to." He nodded and looked relieved in the way a person does when they've decided not to carry a weight alone anymore. He sat back and very carefully took out an old envelope that time had turned the color of tea. It was wrinkled, but the fold was neat. On the front was my name, in the square-handed script I could have picked from 1,000. Beverly. No frills. No hearts. Just that stubborn, careful lettering that always meant he had something important to say and didn't want the letters to get in the way. My eyes pricked with the kind of tears that don't fall but anchor themselves and make everything in their view more serious. "Of course he used a piece of masking tape," I said, and I laughed because that's what you do when your heart opens a door and the hinges creak. Anything to keep it from slamming. Albert smiled. His smile has some of his father in it, my son, and it pulled something in my chest that had been tangled too long. "There's a story there, one with edges, but this is not the night for blame or catalogues. This is the night my grandson came to me with a found thing and sought permission to make it ours. Before we open it," he said, "can I ask you something else?" He glanced at the record shelf again. "There's this one you always played when I was little. The blue one. You'd hum it when you did the dishes. I never knew the name." My head tilted toward the shelf as if it had a gravity of its own. "It's not blue, darling." The slipcover faded. "It's Autumn Nocturne, the old waltz. Your grandfather loved to dance to it after the late shift when he was too tired to speak. We would sway in our socks, and the kitchen would smell like coffee and cold air." I paused. Sometimes I think that song kept the house together. "Would you—" He stopped, searching for the right way to not make the question heavy. "Would you play it now? With me here?" The request floated between us like a small, steady boat. He was asking for more than music. He was asking to step into a room that until now had been locked and dust-soft. I stood, my knees remembering the years but forgiving them, and crossed to the shelf. My fingers traced the spine as if the cardboard had veins. I slid the record out, its black face reflecting the lamp. The player woke up with a quiet whir, and the needle settled like a bird landing on a branch. The first notes unspooled and the air changed. The room expanded in that way music can make a small space feel like the inside of a cathedral. I closed my eyes, and there he was, my Albert, in his work shirt with the name patch, Adele, stitched a little crooked, his hands warm, his cheek rough as a porch railing. I kept my eyes closed a little longer, and then opened them to see the other Albert, the younger, sitting forward in the chair, eyes shiny, as if he felt something he couldn't name tugging at him from the far bank of a river. "Grandma," he said, standing. "May I?" "May you what?" I teased gently, though I knew, and I wanted him to say it. "May I hold your hands while we listen? Just for a minute. You see, there are some gestures that can lose their innocence if you make them out of loneliness or show. But this wasn't that. This was a bridge. This was a blessing being braided. I nodded, and he came to me like a man approaching a candle with cupped palms. We stood there in the quiet waltz, fingers touching, then linking, and I remembered how tall the men in my family are, how they always stoop to gather you in without making you feel small. We didn't dance, not really. We swayed, two people held by a memory that didn't belong to one of them yet. The record crackled in its old bones. The clock remembered to tick. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator sighed. My eyes drifted to the envelope on the table, my name watching us in square letters. He spoke first, not wanting to chase away the music but wanting to add to it. "I think Dad and I have been wrong about a lot of things," he said, voice low. "I think I've been angry for reasons that have nothing to do with you. I want to fix that. And there's more." He breathed in out. "The letter. Grandpa wrote something to you. I don't know what, but I found a small box too. I didn't open it. It had your wedding photo tucked beside it, folded like a secret everyone forgot to tell me." He swallowed. "Grandma, I'm asking your blessing to read this with you. And if there's something in it that should be said to Dad, will you let me help you say it?" He said it the way a good man asks to pick up a heavy bag, not because he thinks you can't lift it, but because love makes work look different. "Yes," I said, and my voice chose steadiness. "If there's something to carry, we'll carry it together." We let the last measures fade into the soft fur of quiet, and then sat close on the sofa, knees almost touching. He placed the envelope in my hands like sacrament, then pulled back, letting me decide the pace. Consenting to the moment is a peculiar kind of power. It says, "I am here of my own choosing." It says, "I have been asked, not taken." I traced the edge with my thumb and found the old glue still rough. "Before we open it," I said, surprising myself, "tell me the other reason you came in here tonight. The letter is one, but your shoulders told me there's a second." He smiled, caught but grateful. "Grandma, I'm in love." He blushed in that quiet male way that looks like a throat clearing, not a confession. "Her name is Elise. We met at the campus radio station. I want to propose before the first snow." He reached into his shirt pocket then, and my breath held on like a child to a poolside on a bus. He unfolded a tiny square of soft cloth and revealed a ring, plain, elegant, the kind of ring that makes a promise instead of performing one. I found this in the box too. There was a note that said, "For a promise that keeps going." I didn't. I won't take it if it's not right, but it felt like it wanted to be warmed by a hand again. My first thought was of my husband's fingers, thick and capable, unscrewing jar lids and fixing hinges, rolling that band around when he worried the way some men worry a combing. My second was of Elise, whom I did not know yet but would know soon, the way you know a season by the color of its first light. My third was of my son, and the long, stubborn argument that had built itself a cabin between us and stocked it with old grievances. A ring could travel across that country if we let it. Your grandfather would say, I told him, that a ring is a circle because a good love is a road you always find your way back to. If he left it marked for a promise that keeps going, then he meant for it to travel. Yes, darling. Yes, with my blessing. The smile he gave me then did something to the corners of the room. Maybe it made them rounder. Maybe it made the shadows less sure of themselves. He tucked the ring away with a reverence that honored both the dead and the living, then leaned back, and we considered the letter together. "Ready?" he asked. Almost. I reached for his hand again, a quick squeeze, not to keep him but to anchor myself. One more thing. When we read it, we take it slow. We let it say what it says without arguing with ghosts. He nodded. Deal. I slid a butter knife under the flap so I wouldn't tear the paper. It seemed important not to make a wound where none belonged. The glue gave with a soft sigh, and the fold released. Inside was a single page, creased, the ink a little faded but steady. At the top, in that same square script, I recognized the first line before I even read it. Beverly, if the house is quiet when you find this. I stopped there. I don't know why. Maybe because the words had reached for my throat and held my pulse between their fingers. Maybe because I wanted to sip this and not swallow the whole thing. I looked at Albert, and he looked at me, and then he did the most respectful thing a young man can do. He asked, "May I read the next line to you?" "Yes," I said, the way a person opens a door they've kept closed too long. "Please do." He cleared his throat, and his voice, so like his father's and yet so much its own, poured the next words into the room as if the walls had been waiting to drink. "And that is where I will leave you tonight, with the envelope open, the room listening, and the old clock lifting its hands toward something kinder than the hour it says." Albert's voice was steady as he read the next line, though I could see the small tremor in his hand where the paper quivered between his fingers. "Beverly, if the house is quiet when you find this, it means I never found the right moment to say the words out loud." The room stilled around us, as if even the air leaned in. My breath caught, but I reached for Albert's wrist, gently steadying him. He didn't stop reading. "I have not been a man of speeches, you know that, but you deserved one. You deserved more than these quiet grunts after work, more than the tired hands setting down a lunchbox. You deserved to hear that every mile I drove home, I was coming back to you, not just to the house." My eyes blurred, the words swimming. It was his voice again, somehow carried across time, and the walls of death itself. Albert's voice was younger, but the words, they were my husband's heart written in ink. Albert paused and looked at me. Should I keep going? I nodded because there was no other answer. The letter went on. "If I leave this world too suddenly, know that I went with the thought of your laugh still ringing. Know that I carried your face with me. I was never afraid of the work, or of the cold, or of the hard days. I was only ever afraid of not having given enough back to the woman who gave me everything." The paper trembled again, but this time it was Albert's breath shaking, not just his hands. "Grandma," he whispered, lowering the sheet, "I feel like he's in the room." And he was. My Albert, my husband, was in the cracked record still spinning faintly on the turntable. He was in the square strokes of his letters, in the steadiness of his words. And he was in the quiet way his grandson was holding this letter as though it might split the world open. I reached over, smoothed Albert's hair like I had when he was little, and whispered, "He is. Right now, he is." We sat like that for a long time, the letter folded in my lap. I told Albert about the years after his grandfather passed, the way I filled the silence with chores, the way I poured myself into raising his father, even through the stubborn fights. I told him about the mornings I'd still hear the ghost of work boots at the door, and how sometimes I hummed that waltz just to remind myself I wasn't invisible. Albert listened, really listened. His face softened in ways I hadn't seen since he was a boy, before life and pride and family tensions hardened him. Finally, he said, "Grandma, I don't want us to be quiet anymore. I don't want Dad and me to keep building fences where there should be bridges. I want him to know about this letter. I want Elise to know too. I want them all to understand what real love looks like." His eyes glistened when he said Elisa's name. That girl I had not yet met had already become part of this story, part of this legacy. "You will show them," I said, taking his hand, "not with sermons, with the way you live, with the way you love her. That's how a family heals."